And welcome back to Connecticut Down Set Out. I am one of your hosts, Tim Gabriel, and with me, as always, is.
I'm Amanda Gabriel.
I'm Steve Gifford.
And today we actually have a very special guest with us today. If you are watching on the new video version of Connecticut Inside Out, you probably could already see that. We have Mr. Justin Farmer with us. Justin is a member of the Hamden Town Council, representing District 5. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this as well. Candidate for the Connecticut State Senate District 17, which represents parts of Hamden, Woodbridge, Ansonia, Bethany, Beacon Falls, and Naugatuck. He is a community organizer, a strong progressive, and members of so many groups that we could probably do an entire podcast just listing those out. So I'm going to skip over that. But we are recording this today on Memorial Day, and usually a day like this, there's a lot going on out in the community. People are kind of gathering together, they're celebrating, but we are in the midst of Corona lockdown apocalypse part, week 114 or something like that, and it doesn't look like what it used to be. How has that changed your schedule in terms of campaigning, in terms of kind of the usual activism that you're involved in? What does today look like for you, and what is a normal day starting to look like under this new normal?
Well, yeah, thank y'all for having me. In terms of all that is, I'm finally at the tail end of my calendar where I bike and bus and train and commute and rideshare. So it's different for me where there's been a couple of times, even in the last week, where a calendar update will pop up and it's like, this is happening. And I'll run and I'll start putting on clothes and I'm like trying to figure out, I'm like, oh, I don't physically have to go anywhere. I just have to like turn to my computer. So most of my time is making phone calls, being on Zoom a lot, like so many other people. And in terms of events, like today, Memorial Day, there's so many historic sites people would be paying homage to, or instead, I'm just reflecting on some thoughts I have about Memorial Day, and sharing that propaganda out to the world via social media rather than, um, being in community with actual people at different historic sites and traveling between the different towns to make sure that I don't miss some uh, uh, consequential event in their community that's a little bit different from another community down the street. Uh, in terms of schedule, campaigns are really sporadic, so it's still in flux, but I'm just not going to as many places. And I think the biggest thing is trying to figure out now how much time realistically should I be out and how often should I be out? Because as I'm trying to convince people to stay at home when necessary, I'm like, all right, well, should I be at the food bank? Do they actually need me? Or is this more one of those cheesy photo op opportunities for me? And like balancing where I'm actually needed and what is the best in terms of messaging as well as keeping people safe.
Yeah, I feel like probably so much of campaigns is usually is being known and just being somebody that the community is familiar with, and that's got to be especially tough with parts of the area that maybe you are not in as much. The 17th district is a pretty wide area. It's a big plot of land.
So Justin, on that same note, because we're North Haven's leading podcast. We say that mostly because we're not aware of any others, so it's reasonably uncontested. But I, for myself anyway, I don't know. I'm always aware of Hamden things. We share, like the 34th. No, 34th doesn't. Anyway, we share some things across boundaries. I know.
Like a Dairy Queen. We share a Dairy Queen.
We share a Dairy Queen. I've walked with Justin before, and he's like, "Oh, this looks exactly like the same neighborhood on the other side of the road." Can you talk to us a little bit about your time on the Hamden Town Council and kind of what some of the things that you're proud of accomplishing there?
Yeah, thank you. you know, it was kind of cheesy, but there's been a couple of different events. So there was this apartment complex with stairs that people were falling through. And this is before I was elected. I pressured my opponent and the mayor to get the stairs fixed. So people are falling through. And a friend probably 3 weeks ago asked me, like, what do you feel is your biggest accomplishment? And that was kind of the thing that was, to me, like my biggest accomplishment were like 50 apartment homes. They just didn't have stairs where they would fall through. Um, Canal Crossing, 10% of it is affordable housing. They were going to, the developer wanted to switch that and make it all market rate housing. So there are these beautiful apartments and lofts. And, the cheapest apartment without lobbying on that would have been 2,200. Yeah. So
That's more than our mortgage.
yeah. So I think the cheapest now is probably 1,400 with like energy assistance, um, which just brings economic diversity and diversity in the community in general. I've chaired the environmental committee, so we passed a plastic bag ban, um, like so many other municipalities in the state. We passed a fracking waste ban as well. Um,
Is
so
the
those have
plastic
been like,
bag ban, is that still in effect in Hamden? Because I know a lot of the state is kind of like reversed that.
so the mayor did an executive order and reversed ours. I have been very upset and frustrated about it because um, the few business people who are upset about plastic bags, I feel that it became a political issue where it didn't need to be. I'm like, conservatives, Democrats, libertarians, socialists, it doesn't matter. I'm like, cool, we all use the planet. I think we can all agree that we should be good stewards of our community and our environment. We can all agree we don't like seeing plastic bag debris and waste. So to see some politicians feel the need to pander, but I'm just like, this is a public education. We are a coastal community because we have the Quinnipiac River, and because of that, we have an extra responsibility.
So can I ask,
Yeah.
I sit on the Board of Education in North Haven. I do not represent the Board of Education on this call. I want to just put a quick disclaimer. I'm not speaking for them. I'm speaking for me alone. But because I sit on the Board of Education here in North Haven, education is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And my sister happens to be a teacher in Ansonia, in the Ansonia School District. And, I was talking to her before this call, and she was like, can you do me a favor? Can you just ask him, like, what does he want to do to increase educational opportunities in places like Ansonia? And how could he help us from the state level?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So education is actually going to be a pillar of my campaign. So as I told y'all before, I happen to have Tourette's syndrome. So while I was in my junior year of school, I had to advocate for myself. I needed a $2,000 word processor, speech to text, so that when I was having these sporadic movements from this neurological disorder, that I'd be able to, if I couldn't type at the moment, I could speak into the device and get my work done. My school tried to find every way to avoid spending that $2,000. I ended up getting testing, found out I had OCD. I read the DSM diagnostic manual, figured out I had OCD, and then pushed my school to test me. And through all of this, there was went back and forth with the school district. Was out of school because I kept having seizures because of fire alarms. And I had to advocate for myself to get back into school. And at the end of it, I probably cost the town $70,000, $80,000 for a year and a half worth of education. When, if a fraction of that was spent in my pre-K education or K through 6 education, it'd be demonstrably a demonstrable difference. I'm like, spending $80,000 on me, I should have like 5 Yale degrees and, assistant dean at Quinnipiac at this point. But like, that's not how, you can't just dump a ton of money on students at the end. So that's what brings me to this work. In terms of the district, um, ECS, this whole entire district is an alliance grant. Uh, we don't get the money we're supposed to get.
Yeah.
So from the state in the first place, in Hamden's case, for the last 20 years, it's about $20 million. Um, you know, the state has said, hey, we owe you an extra $1 million, but we haven't given it to you. So like, you've told me for 2 generations, for 2 decades, that you, by your own calculation, you're not giving me enough money for our kids, but then you want them to succeed. That is not possible. Like, from your own point of view, we don't have enough resources. So that's the first thing of solidifying that. They did like a meal patch type thing with the cost taxes, where they said for alliance grant districts, they could, charge over what the cap was. I think the cap was 37 to 42, and municipalities that went over that, the state would reimburse them that tax money to supplement for education.
It's up to like 70 now. It's like the excess cost money is really high now.
Which is just like, that when, especially when you're talking about special education, when you're saying you basically have to spend 5 times what the student costs to get reimbursed. These are things like, we just have to change it.
But Justin, I think you had such a good point earlier. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think, your point was like, if we invest early in children, in, diagnosis and identification of children early, and that does cost money to do, but, a pound of diagnosis ends up paying dividends, throughout years and years. And, North Haven's in a really interesting position right now where we are the average house price in North Haven is like the median throughout the state of Connecticut. We're very average, but our school system outperforms. So we're seeing an influx of folks with special needs come, and my personal preference is to have them come. They should feel welcome here. They should come here. They should get the benefit of an excellent education, but we are struggling with that state funding as well. And we're struggling with a tax base that does not really have an appetite to increase funding for schools. Even like our Democratic representation is arguing to cut funding for our special programs, which is really difficult for me to hear right now. It's tough for me to hear other Democrats coming at Republicans from the right now. But it's happening. So I love to hear somebody who's planning on going up to the state capitol and being an educational advocate. So I wanted to say thank you for that, and then I'm with you on early diagnosis.
So I'm interested in that piece, because Justin, a lot of the pre-K things and early diagnosis things you're talking about are kind of a town by town decision that some are implementing better than others. What does that look like on the state level? What like legislative level things need to change to push the towns in the right direction on that kind of outcomes?
Well, yeah, this is something that we need to have regionalization. And for many people that becomes scary, but there's 2 things. One, legislators like myself, we need to be more involved in our communities, and we need to also be introducing people and connecting people. You can't just go into any community and say you need to share resources and have no roots, no connections to people. That's not a real thing. On the other end, the state keeps saying they're going to do a carrot stick approach. I'm like, all right, if we do regionalization, okay, you're offering Hamden $2, $3 million, $4 million in incentives. My town budget a year is $230 million. $5 million is not. I'm like, what can I do for $5 million? Like, that realistically is not incentivizing communities to really come together for cost sharing. So from that perspective, one, it's getting both at the local level, like the city councilors, the select people, the people are the RTMs in the neighboring cities and towns need to know each other. Because if we're making decisions, if I'm going to make a decision about pre-K and I say, hey, I'll build a space and you can send 20 of your kids here and reimburse, and we can all get cost sharings off of that. That needs to be had. That's a conversation that needs to be had before someone's building and designing something. That needs to be a community's decision. And then from the state, they need to really incentivize that before the state put a ton of money into magnet schools. But instead of magnet schools, people want some autonomy over their children's education. So putting money towards regional assets. So saying swimming pool, trade program, things that, cool, I can keep my school district as it is, but I can also have an option to educate my kids and share resources and share experiences with other towns, rather than building physical structures that last for 20, 30 years, and then you have to figure out how to rebuild them, how to maintain them. So those are things, yeah.
So can I ask you about the state budget, which is something that I love talking about because I'm very involved in the town of North Haven's budget, and we have seen our insurance costs. Town of North Haven's a big employer within North Haven. We've seen our insurance costs go up every year, and they are rising at a rate that is disproportionate to the rate that our budgets are increasing. So, for example, we have a 13% increase in insurance cost on the Board of Education side this year, and we might get a 4.5% increase in the overall budget if we're very lucky. So as that's happening, as the insurance cost is increasing, it's decreasing the proportion of our overall budget that we're able to spend on programs. And this is not a unique problem to North Haven. And I think folks are looking to the state level and to the federal level at ways in which we can kind of tackle the insane proportionate increases of healthcare costs specifically. So I wanted to just ask your thoughts on that and to see if you had any ideas on how the state could help us with that, or anything that you would advocate for on a federal level as well.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a secret that I'm a big supporter of Medicare for all. But on the state level, Kevin Lembo, who is the comp controller for the state for I'm going to say several years because I've only been involved with politics for maybe 3 years, but probably for the last decade, comp controller Lembo has pushed for like a state plan over and over again. And every time we come close, Malloy promised he was going to go through with like a Connecticut program. He got elected, and then he was like, I'm not going to do it anymore. Last year, Sean Scanlon and Senator Lesser and the comp controller Lembo proposed a program, and Aetna threatened to leave the state of Connecticut over, potentially having a Connecticut option. So, those are things where I feel the state just needs to figure it out. We're going to have big businesses and people say that they're going to leave. But to your point, the state pays for this one way or another. If Aetna left, that'd be tons of jobs. That'd be unfortunate. I doubt that they would actually leave. But if they did, that'd be really unfortunate. But every single town is dealing with the same thing you just said, where they have increases in education costs in terms of pension and healthcare, that it's just like, all right, well, the answer can't be giving less people healthcare. I think after COVID-19 and everything that we see, that can't be the answer. We can't say less people with healthcare through their employer unless we're saying that the state or the federal government is going to take that up. So the way to deal with it is for them to get involved. I know Comp Controller Lembo and Representative Scanlon had an article. Representative Scanlon wrote an op-ed last week talking about bringing back up, maybe in a special session, to pass a Connecticut plan.
So on the note of people leaving, like we have done several podcasts on like how like very trendy it is for people to threaten to leave Connecticut. And now that COVID-19 has hit, the Hartford Courant ran an article today and said that like house sales in Fairfield County are up 74% year over year for the month of April. So it's like, oh, now you want to
Connecticut's
come
the
live in
same house.
Connecticut. Now it's very trendy to live here. Ooh, look at us. So I'm just wondering like um thoughts on the whole like I'm gonna leave uh trend that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and there are consequences. That is, I'm 6 houses from living in New Haven, um, and people will say, "Well, you can't represent the Valley because you don't understand what it's like to be us, and you don't understand the issues we have." I'm like, cool. When Winchester gun factories left my community, it is the same situations that we're dealing with when factories left the Valley. We're still dealing with the economic consequences 30, 40, 50 years later of industrial factory leaving my community. So I want to be cognizant to that there are growing pains, but in terms of Connecticut is strategically in the middle of Boston and New York. Um, you know, we're around so many states that have things going on, and we see all these states pass this great legislation and do all these things, and we're always last to do it because someone's always threatening of leaving. Oh, well, Justin, we can't pass in-state tuition. Okay, well, while we can't do that, New York City has figured out a way to do that, and they are retaining their job force. Oh no, we can't have community choice aggregation. I'm like, okay, well, while that's happening, other communities are saving. So we have to make up priorities of like what industries we want to keep and which ones we don't want to keep. Insurance, is that going to be the future of Connecticut? I don't think so. Um, you know, stock, is that going to be the future of Connecticut? Probably not. Um, you know, your Sikorsky, your electric boat, they probably will be around for a while. So it's like, all right, how do we change that to things that are more beneficial? How do we change to machine shops working in conjunction with smaller uh, uh, vendors to build, solar panels or to provide solar farms to give energy to other states, or developing people to do retrofitting. Um, with us being so close, it makes no sense to me to see people from New York come into Connecticut to install solar panels and to put in backup batteries when there's plenty of jobs and opportunities in New York City. It would make more sense for Connecticut to train that workforce and go to neighboring states. And those are the type of things that legislators have to think about, uh, versus always chasing industry that's already here. Because if we don't have a backup plan, at some point they will leave, and then the threat that they always lobby that they never follow through with actually will affect our community.
I agree with you on that, and I also think that Connecticut has some of the best schools, colleges, universities in the country. I would love to see us become more innovative, like be less tethered to I mean, I'm part of an industry of the past, so yikes. But be less tethered to like the way that we've always done things, and kind of start blazing a trail. I know that we've tried with like Connecticut being the new Hollywood, and that just like that was not going to happen. I'd love to be the new Georgia in that respect, though. Like we could get maybe some of that business. But I'm interested in your thoughts on like additional industries that we can, and additional opportunities for innovation that we can encourage right here at home in Connecticut.
Well, yeah, especially with in terms of COVID, epidemiology is something that everyone's thinking about it. What are we doing to prepare people to be doctors, nurses, educators in this sense? There's always a shortage of nurses, so why aren't we in Connecticut training people? Um, we had people go from nursing here in Connecticut to neighboring states to help out. That means there's a need, and if there's a need, and we're only 2 hours from New York City. We're only an hour and a half from Boston. If we have people making those commutes already, if we invest in public transportation, it's crazy to me that New York City is 70 miles away from us, but for some reason, it is faster for me to hop on a train to get to New York City. I can more likely and reliably get to New York City and back than making a trip up to Hartford and back, just because of train times. So like that is something we are uniquely small, where we can employ our workforce across borders. Something else that we can really focus on is, again, green technologies, solar panels. There's more than enough jobs through military contracts for renewables that we could tap into. But mostly, I think the big thing that we should be thinking about as a state is Long Island Sound. We've kind of just neglected one of our natural resources, where our fishing industries aren't there anymore. We don't really do anything with our sound. The only thing we do is import oil. Outside of that, even research, we're not really using a natural resource that we have for shipping, for storing and containing stuff. So that is something that I see Connecticut being a regional hub to transport goods as well as information, all across Northeast.
So back along the lines of people saying that they're going to leave Connecticut, it seems like one of the issues that we run into a lot is our the way that we fund resources within the state is not as progressive as it potentially could be, in that we have an enormous amount of wealth that's sort of concentrated in one region of the state. That region sometimes is represented by Democrats. A lot of times it is. So even though there might be a hunger within the Democratic Party to tax the rich a little bit more, those Democratic representatives, because we don't have regionalization or some of these other things, are sort of represented, and that they're hearing from their wealthy constituents about like the fact that they don't want that, and we sort of have this kind of perpetual cycle of austerity that keeps going on. How do we kind of work with, within the limits that we have, to make sure that either those people see the kind of the benefits of making sure that we're kind of distributing the wealth evenly, or how do we make that sort of final change happen? Because it seems like that's always sort of a progressive priority, but it's always a non-starter, at least every year that I've been kind of paying attention to local politics.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's I've had to change my definition of what the wealthy is. I happen to represent the poorest people in town as well as the richest people in town, and I live amongst the poorest people in town. So 5-6 blocks up from me, there are people who easily make $200,000-$300,000 a year, which is insane to my family, only making like $42,000 a year. That's a huge difference in quality of life and living. Um, but that's not the people we're talking about when we're talking about the wealthiest not paying their fair share. We're talking about people in the Gold Coast who are literally making millions. Representative Elliott has talked about the carry interest loophole. That's something that we can look into. But for instance, other things, Amazon, the Amazon warehouse that was built, there was tons of subsidies and things that were giving to them. We should be going after wealthy businesses that come in to do business in our state who are obfuscating the responsibilities. Um, you know, um, it's no longer feasible to give away everything just to bring in some jobs, especially if it's going to cost more in the long term. Things like Facebook, they collect our data. that's something that we should be charging them for. Like if you're a business and you're doing a lot of microtransactions in the state of Connecticut, you are doing business in the state of Connecticut, we should be collecting from that revenue. There's no reason why you shouldn't be contributing to our economy when we're contributing to your business and your business model. And those are the type of conversations that, you know, tax wealth in a different way. You know, if I'm saying that, you know, we need to tax Facebook for the infrastructure and the infrastructure use of doing business in our state, no one's going to get upset. Um, and those are the type of the out of the box ways that we need to start thinking about taxing wealth so that it's not direct, so that we don't get into these tedious arguments, because our tax structure is regressive where, cool, taxing me for food and medicine, I don't care how wealthy you are, you're just not good. Me buying groceries is a huge share of my wealth. You can buy $100, you know, bar of cheese. It's still not going to make the same difference in your daily budget as it was for mine. And those are the type of things, car taxes. There's no reason why Greenwich, I can own the same car and spend less in taxes living in Greenwich for the same car in North Haven or Hamden. Those are the type of things that we just need to eliminate and make equal, and definitely move towards those conversations about how those communities can have fair share, because also there's no reason why, you know, people in the Gold Coast, to pick on Greenwich once again, Greenwich is getting $2
Okay.
million in
They can deal with
ECS. You know, their schools don't need $2 million for ECS. This conversation about fairness and equity are two different things. If I don't give Greenwich schools $2 million for ECS, it might not be fair to them. But in terms of equity, that $2 million going to my budget would probably offset, you know, the increases in health insurance costs, rather than having to cut the school budget to make sure everything else functions in town. So that's some of my thoughts and perspectives on that.
Justin, picking on Greenwich is firmly on brand for our podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we support that. So I just want to be cognizant of time. We have about 4 minutes left. So Steve, you've been quiet. You got anything for us here?
I mean, Justin, I guess, and just as a closing thing, what are the big top three things you would want to accomplish in the legislature?
Yeah, so the Green New Deal is something I'm definitely working on, talking about community choice aggregation, CCAs, so allowing municipalities, communities to bulk their energy costs together, bring that down and get better buying power. The Green New Deal itself, talking about investing in infrastructure to have a just transition. People always are like, oh, the Green New Deal, this is a leftist thing. I'm like, no, it's basically your plan of conservation, except for now, instead of looking for random investors, we're taking money from the Green Fund and thinking of ways that we can have industry that's not extractive and making sure that it's sustainable and long term, rather than things that are tertiary and short term. Education, working on ECS, working on making sure that schools are getting their fair share, figuring out how to increase money for trade schools and post-secondary education. There's many people in my age range of the, 18 to 27 range who aren't in college, where, they don't necessarily apply for certain programs, but they definitely could start apprenticeships and have that money go towards educating them in trade schools and in other trades, like retrofitting. And the third thing is transportation. Our rural ring suburbs and our inner cities aren't connected. And whether you're talking about transportation in terms of bringing goods, like for instance in Hamden, having the rail system be able to transport more goods for commercial use, whether you're talking about the Waterbury line to connect people who are working in New York to the Valley and being able to bring in capital, or you're talking about bringing in industry. Uh, if you do not have proper transportation, you're not going to be able to lower that grand list and bring in businesses that you need. So those are the like three main things I will be focusing on. Um, yeah.
All right, sounds good, Justin. So we're just about to get booted off our call because we're on the free version of Zoom because we're super cheap. Are you real quick? Have you qualified for CEP funding yet?
I am close. So at this point, I am only worried about in-district contributions. So if you
Okay. So
happen
if
to
you live in the 17th, they should go to justin4ct.com. Is that it?
.com. And you can find me on my handles, Justin for CT, for the word, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
All right,
Well,
thank you.
thank you so much
Thank
for
you
coming
so much for
on
coming
with us.
on.
Thanks.
Good to see
Safe
you as always.
travels.
Take care.
Take care.